Okay, hello, Ling 341. After talking about the phonemes of English last time, I want to get into some of the variations on the basic English phonemic system that you can expect to find out there in the English-speaking world. We'll just talk about some generalities here and also talk about how it kind of relates to the phoneme versus allophone split in English. And also, in particular, kind of talk about what you can expect to hear in Canadian English. So, the textbooks for this class, or at least the course in phonetics textbook, I'll mention was written by Peter Ladefoged, who was an English speaker from England originally, and he moved to California in the middle of his career and became well known there. So he, in that textbook, described English, and also American English. And then the co-author of that textbook, Keith Johnson, was also from the U.S., from Oklahoma, and then moved to California himself. And it turns out that Canadian English is not either American English or English, and there are a few unique features of it that we'll walk through today, at least to get us started on this process of learning how to transcribe the way you guys probably speak. With that in mind, this is the word of caution I'm going to begin with, which is that the vowel system of English can vary greatly from one dialect to another. And in particular, we can look at Canadian English and find that the vowels of Canadian English are shifting away from their American counterparts for some, but not all speakers. And this seems to be a change in progress, so it's happening more in younger speakers, in particular younger females, than it is for anybody else. But it's out there, so you need to be aware of it as you transcribe these vowels, because there's a lot of them, and there's a pretty good likelihood that your particular vowel qualities are not what the vowel qualities in the book are supposed to represent, or the vowel qualities in the IPA symbol system are supposed to represent. So with that in mind, I'll give you some sound samples so you can listen to these and match them up with the particular symbols that are supposed to represent them, just so you can start to kind of tease apart the minor shades of difference in quality between the various symbols in the IPA vowel system. So first of all, I'll mention there is kind of a general shift in Canadian English where you might have this vowel in American English, ah, and in Canadian English, it's rounded a little bit. So it goes to, the symbol used is kind of, you can even think of it as an upside down. No, it's actually rotated 180 degrees. This symbol rotated around to, I guess, represent the rounding a little bit. And it's more like aw as opposed to ah. So it's this is kind of like the sound you make when you see a cute puppy or something, like aw, what have you. And that's more commonly found in Canadian English than it is in most varieties of American English. So just to play some samples I've got for this.
6 spoons of fresh snow peas, 5 thick slabs of blue cheese, and maybe a snack for her brother Bob.
Okay, so what I want to focus on here, this is a token taken from the George Mason University accent database, which is online. I'll put a link up here on one of the slides. But what I want to focus on in this particular token is the name Bob, B-O-B, at the tail end of this excerpt.
6 spoons of fresh snow peas, 5 thick slabs of blue cheese, and maybe a snack for her brother Bob.
So that speaker is from Saskatoon, if I recall correctly. And so B-O-B is like Bob. So maybe it's even
6 spoons of fresh snow peas, 5 thick slabs of blue cheese, and maybe a snack for her brother Bob.
More dramatically shifted than this would represent. Here's an unshifted variant of the same name.
6 spoons of fresh snow peas, 5 thick slabs of blue cheese, and maybe a snack for her brother Bob.
Bob. So this speaker is from Calgary, and I got these samples about 15 years ago, so, the world has changed a bit since then, but, you can still expect to hear both varieties in Canadian English. And it depends on who you are talking to, of course, not only where they're from, but just the specific speaker. So this guy is using the ah variant here, and this speaker, this female speaker, is using this variant, or maybe one that's even a little bit higher than that. I've got another one. So this is one that I've noticed a lot in moving to Canada from the United States. Another one that I've noticed a lot is that this particular ash vowel, can be shifted a little bit lower to this typewriter A. So I'll give you a sample of that.
I usually smoke about half a pack a day.
And this is a subtle distinction. It's prominent to my ears because I'm a phonetician. I'm, kind of bi-dialectal at this point across the boundary of Canada and the United States, but it's in this one.
I usually smoke about half a pack a day.
So he's using that sort of typewriter A, that script A. Here's me saying the same phrase. I usually smoke about half a pack a day. So half a pack a day, half as opposed to
I usually smoke about half a pack a day.
half as opposed to half. So that's subtle as well, but you can pick up on it if you listen for it. There are also a few newer vowel shifts underway. These I haven't heard as much in general Canadian English, but like I said, this is a change in progress. So I hear it more often in my students, in particular younger speakers of Canadian English. So this first shift is going to ah. So if goes to then it leaves kind of an empty space, and so I guess can shift into it. I think this is the kind of the older variant of the word head.
Bed.
Or bed, basically the same thing. So this is the TA I had for this course the very first time I taught it in Calgary in 2007. She's about my age.
Bed.
Here's a younger speaker of Canadian English saying HEAD.
Head.
And hopefully you can hear that. It's not quite had, but it's getting closer to that.
Head.
It's almost there, right? So it's not quite it's a little bit, as we say, lower than that. I'll describe these, or I'll explain to you why I'm using these descriptors of like lower and rounder and so on and so forth in a minute here. This vowel is shifting more to so this kind of moved away from so it left an open space for to move into it. Here's the sort of older variant. Bid.
Head.
So hopefully you can hear that. This vowel actually winds up being closer to this one, right?
Bed. Head.
Yeah. So that's moving around. Another one that I've heard from my students when they produce these vowels for an upcoming assignment is that this vowel has moved to more of what's represented with this symbol. It's like a rounded schwa, something like that, or maybe even a little bit fronter than that. So here's the hood from my former TA.
Hood.
And here's from a former student.
Hood.
Yeah, not quite the same vowel, right?
Hood. Hood.
Yeah, so I'll try to explain where this is coming from after walking you through a few more shifts that you can expect to see or hear in Canadian English as well. So the final element involves the fronting of the vowel oo, and so this isn't particular to or specific to Canadian English. It's actually more a kind of a general feature of modern day English. So this vowel oo, as it's represented or presented in the IPA system, is supposed to be a really nice back ooh like that. But a lot of younger speakers of Canadian English, American English, Australian English, so on and so forth, front this vowel, so it sounds a little bit different. So I'll explain what fronting means in a second. I'll just play you these examples so you can hear it.
6 spoons of fresh snow peas.
So that's a speaker from Los Angeles. And she has that ooh still relatively where the IPA system says it's supposed to be. The Saskatoon speaker, however, fronts it. You can listen to that.
6 spoons of fresh snow peas.
So I'll just zoom in on the word spoons there.
Spoons.
Spoons.
So hopefully you can hear that difference. This is spoons.
Spoons.
This is spoons.
Spoons.
Something like that. And this is just the vowel by itself.
Spoon.
Oops.
Spoon.
Yeah, let's try that again.
Spoon.
Yeah, so hopefully you can hear that difference. The vowels are a little bit nasalized there. I'll talk about that in the future too because there's an N afterwards. But ooh versus oo, something like that. So not every Canadian does this either. So this is our Calgarian speaker again.
6 spoons of fresh snow peas.
So his spoons
is
that ooh is back there.
Spoons.
More like that rather than fronted like this.
Spoons.
Okay, so hopefully you can hear that difference. There's also one other distinction I want to show you that will kind of let you know that the North American vowel systems are undergoing, they're both kind of undergoing shifts that make them less similar to each other. So the American vowel system, at least in some parts of the United States, is shifting in one way, and the Canadian vowel system in most of the country is shifting in the other way. So this is kind of funny. I'll play these samples, but when TV was invented or radio was invented in the middle of the 20th century, people had this notion that we can kind of unify the world through communicating through these media. And therefore the English speaking world will probably all start to sound alike over time. And maybe that might happen, but that's not what is happening in North America. Canadian English and American English are sounding less like each other over time. Who knows why, but I'll show you kind of the consequence of that. So here's an example of that American vowel shift that we get around the Great Lakes region, or the cities around the Great Lakes like Chicago, which is by Lake Michigan. So this is that name B-O-B again.
Bob.
Pronounced by a Chicago speaker.
Bob.
Bob, like that. So I don't really have this transcribed here. I normally do this on the board, but this, we can give it a shot, is Bob, like that. And then we have the Saskatoon speaker.
Bob.
So that vowel is actually so kind of rounded and up there. I actually might transcribe it with this open O symbol, which we talked about, I think, last time. Bob. And then there's also New York City speaker.
Rob. Rob.
Yeah, so that one's kind of funny because it's a little indistinct exactly what she's doing there. So maybe Bob, Bob. So there's Bab, Bob, and Bob, something like that. So these are all, modern speakers of English in, neighboring countries, which a lot of people think are very similar to each other. But they're doing very different things with this vowel in the middle of this very common name, B-O-B. So yeah. This is why you have to watch out for these sort of dialectal variants of, especially vowels in English. What you do might be different from what the book says you're supposed to do, right? So this is the point I'm making here in the moral of the story. Your phonemic system might be different from the official transcriptions in the textbooks. So if you don't believe what the books say or what I'm telling you in these lectures, it's very well may be the case that you're right. And that you have noticed something in your own speech that has not been written down as like the official story of what's supposed to be going on. So in that case, I'd say trust your instincts, and you can always bring up these differences in class to let other people know. We may have heard about what you're doing, we may have not. So it's always good to share your knowledge. And also pay attention to both your speech and the phonetic habits of those around you. You might learn something. Oftentimes when you start to pick up on these subtle shades of differences in sound, you can start to kind of pin down where people are from, which is kind of fun, or something else about their background, which may not be immediately obvious. Okay, so again, pay attention, look for generalizations, observe the world of language around you. It's everywhere, right? Other than that, I'm going to try to let you know why I'm describing these vowel quality differences with these particular terms like fronting and rounding, so on and so forth. And then also kind of try to give you an overall story of why the systems are shifting in the way that they are in the particular directions for each particular vowel shift. So, yeah, with no further ado, I'll say that vowel articulations are traditionally characterized along 4 different dimensions, relatively independent features describing what you're doing with your articulators as you produce that vowel. So the first 2 describe the position of the tongue body as you produce the vowel. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called vowel height. And it breaks down into 3 different levels, like high, mid, and low. And if you want to, you can kind of break the mid down further into like mid-high and mid-low. But the idea here is that as you produce a vowel, your tongue is supposed to hit some sort of target position. And you can describe sort of the highest point of the tongue with respect to like going between your palate at the very highest point to like your glottis at the very lowest point. And if it's relatively close to the palate, like in a vowel like E, hopefully you can feel that E, your tongue is up there. That's a high vowel. If you're producing a low vowel like ah, you lower your jaw, your tongue kind of goes back into your pharynx. Ah, that's a low vowel because the highest point of your tongue is relatively low in your vocal tract. Likewise, you're supposed to be able to describe the sort of front-back position of the tongue body as you produce these vowels in the same way. So front, by front I mean towards the lips, and by back I mean, again, towards the larynx. So a vowel like E is going to be a relatively front vowel. Hopefully you can feel that it's produced kind of in the frontal portion or the highest portion of your palate. E, you raise your tongue up there. So the position of the tongue body is front. And if it's a back vowel like ah or oo, that kind of traditional oo, your tongue body, the highest point of it is further back in your vocal tract. So hopefully you can, to some extent, feel where your tongue is as you're making these productions to get a sense of how to describe vowels in these 2 terms, right? Height versus and front backness. There's also the roundedness of your lips. That one's pretty easy to pin down. So are you rounding your lips as you produce a vowel, or are you not rounding your lips as you produce a vowel? So for E, you're not rounding your lips, right? They're actually kind of spread. So you can smile a little bit as you say an E. For ooh, you're tightly rounding your lips, ooh, and you can see that quite easily if you look in a mirror, if you're watching me produce this video. Ooh, that's a rounded vowel. E is an unrounded vowel. And then lastly, there's kind of this catch-all dimension called tenseness, which divides vowels up into tense vowels and lax vowels. Tense vowels are supposed to be produced basically with more effort overall, and they tend to be a bit louder, a bit longer, and sort of have a more distinct vowel quality as well for that reason. So like E is a tense vowel. Hopefully if you just stop everything you're doing and produce it, E, you kind of feel the tension you put into that production. If you produce a similar vowel, which is lax, but is I, that cap I vowel, I, you might feel that you're not putting as much effort into it. It's not lasting as long. And in fact, it kind of doesn't stay in its target position as long as you might want it to. You kind of often want to just produce a schwa after that to kind of relax because it's a lax vowel. So E is tense, I is lax. Yeah, so I'll walk you through kind of what it looks like when people are actually producing these. We'll see a lot of these diagrams in this class, but these are called mid-sagittal diagrams. So I guess turning to the appropriate orientation, this is kind of looking through the middle of your head like this. In the old days, I had a phonetics professor who said, like, imagine that you were slicing your head in the middle as you were producing a vowel, and this is what it would look like. And I'm like, I don't want to imagine that. So don't imagine that, and I'm not going to say that either. Just think of the middle of your head as you're producing a vowel. This is your tongue. This is your teeth and your lips, so on and so forth. Hopefully this can all look familiar. Again, I'll point out, though, that your tongue goes way back into your throat here, so it's not just the bit in the front of your mouth that you might think of as, what you use to lick ice cream or whatever. Anyways, this shows you the tongue position for these three what are called corner vowels, E, U, and Ah. So E is high in front. If we look at the tongue body position, the highest arch of the tongue is in a high position and also in a front position closer to the lips. U is also high, but the tongue body position is further back. And this doesn't really show you much with regard to the lips, but the lips should be rounded for that too, of course. So it's high, back, and rounded. And then ah is also back because it's further back here towards the pharynx, and it's in a low position. You can see there's not much going on here in the mouth itself. The highest arch is kind of way down here in a low spot. And you can feel this if you produce these yourself. I would actually recommend that you walk through this. Normally we do this in class so you don't feel so silly doing this, but you can do it at home in the privacy of your bedroom, I guess, as long as we're in pandemic mode. So just I'll walk you through it, but go E, U, Ah, E, U, Ah, and you can feel what's happening with your tongue as you do that, right? And I'll mention as well, when my daughter was very young, I would go E, U, Ah, and it would fascinate her for quite a long time. So you can always try it with babies if you're too embarrassed to do it in front of your parents. I have an X-ray video I can show you where you can see what the tongue is doing as a speaker of English is actually speaking. This is about a minute long. So this is a really cool video. This is a technique which is no longer used, but when they invented X-rays sort of around the turn of the 20th century, at some point somebody got the idea. It was like, well, why don't we just shoot this at a person's head while they're speaking and we can see everything that's going on inside their mouths. We'll learn a lot about phonetics that way, right? So the problem with that is that obviously you don't want to take a huge load of X-rays for any crucial reason in your life. Science, just the phonetic science, is not good enough. So supposedly back in the teens and the 20s, some people got sick with cancer of this. According to legend, when I first was presented with these videos, they said that somebody had died of this, and they're like, okay, maybe we should stop. I don't actually know if that's true, but it's reasonable to think it might happen. Anyways, in the, I think, early 60s, there was a phonetician named Ken Stevens who did a lot of great work in the field of phonetic science. And one of the things he did was he said, well, I'll just, I'll sacrifice myself for the cause, and I will just make an X-ray video of myself speaking, and we'll do sort of all the various sounds of English so you can see what happens as I produce them. And they compiled it into this minute-long video. And here we go. We can just watch it through once, and then I'll pick out some highlights afterwards.
Her pair, her tear,
her ke, her pa, her ta, her ka, her de, her ne, her se, her ze, her sa, hep, het, heck, hop, hot, hawk, her tea, her ti, her ta, her tu, her tu, her tet, her tot, her tech, her pen, he da, he gi, he ga, ya. Why did Ken set the soggy net on top of his deck? I have put blood on her 2 clean yellow shoes. Stop.
All right, so that's pretty cool. I'm going to focus in on one point, but I'll say that I've watched this many, many times over the years, and I feel like I still see new things in it each time I watch it. It's also kind of funny. It's a bit odd, some of the things he says in it, especially at the end there. I'm not exactly sure who wrote the script for it, but I think the idea was that he was getting all the various vowels in English in those last 2 weird phrases about putting blood on people's shoes or what have you. Do phonetics, but don't do that. Anyways, there's one point in here. For the most part, at the beginning, he's using the same vowel like ah, but he starts to move up the or switch around the vowels here, sort of towards the middle, so we can see what the tongue is doing. So this is the tongue. Like I said, it's not just here. It's a muscle that's not just here in the front of your mouth, but it goes all the way back into your pharynx down here.
A tot.
And it's cool to see it in action like that.
A pen. He.
So yeah, he's making an E here, high front position, right?
E, D, he, da.
And then he goes from E to ah, right? So E, high front, all the way down to low back for ah. So here's kind of the narrowest constriction here for ah. It's in a low back position.
He, gi, he, ga.
Same thing there.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on with your tongue as you produce vowels. It doesn't always make contact with something, or maybe it's not always easy to feel where it might be making contact as you produce a particular vowel, but you can, to a certain extent, get a proprioceptive sense of where your tongue is when you produce these various vowels. And that will hopefully get you started on understanding how to describe these vowels in terms of these features of height and front backness. So I want to take a few moments out to kind of zoom in on potentially confusable vowel distinctions in the IPA, vowels that sound very close to, say, a native English speaker's ears, because we're going to have to sort of tease them apart eventually in this class. And I find, even though it could be confusing to talk about confusing things at the start, I think the earlier you get started, the longer amount of time you have to kind of figure out what the differences are. So one of those differences is the schwa versus wedge distinction in English. And there's not really like a minimal pair which distinguishes between these in American English or Canadian English, but they're pretty close. And I can't actually off the top of my head think of a language which does distinguish these, but it's possible because they are different vowel qualities. And so one way you can kind of tease apart the difference is that in, say, monosyllabic words in American English or in sort of general American English, you would expect to get the wedge variant of a vowel, like in a word like drugs. That vowel in the middle is wedge. In Southern American English, though, it's often pronounced with a schwa, like drugs, as opposed to drugs. And I've got a clip here from Bruce Springsteen. In my dark and shady past, I used to spend a lot of time listening to Bruce Springsteen music. Who knows why? But he does some funny things because he's originally from New Jersey, famously, which is in the northern United States. But he was to a large extent inspired by traditional American music from all over, including the South. So in a lot of his songs, he tries to sound like he's from the South, but he's not really from the South. So sometimes the real Bruce slips through. Anyways, here is a clip from a Bruce Springsteen song, and I'll explain why I'm playing this after I play it. Okay, so times are tough and love was not enough. That first tough, he's not saying it as tough with a wedge in the middle. He's saying it with a schwa. Tough, tough. Times were tough, love was not enough. Yeah, I should never try to imitate the boss. What am I thinking? But I've excised those vowels by themselves so you can kind of focus on that vowel quality distinction. So here's the wedge, which he does in the enough. Sorry. I put these in the wrong spot. Dang it. So let's do that again. So that's the enough, that part, that's the vowel there. This is tough. That's a wedge. Or sorry, that's a schwa. That's schwa. That's wedge. So you're opening your mouth up a little bit more for a wedge than you are for a schwa. But otherwise they sound very similar. So if you're just saying basically like that in which is kind of like default I'm thinking of something to say sound in Canadian or American English, you're probably saying a wedge. Like that. And we get this in sort of limited context in North American English. But that's the difference between what they sound like. And hopefully I didn't screw that up too much to confuse you. But like I said, these are close. It's hard to figure them out. It takes time. So even if you still feel confused, that's normal. Anyways, the other confusable vowel distinctions are all these vowels down at the bottom of the chart. And to be honest, I studied phonetics for years, and I don't feel like I really had a handle on these distinctions until I moved to Canada, like when I was 33, which is a long time ago now. So here are the Bruce Springsteen vowels again. And then I'm going to play you all of these guys around here. So these three vowels, there's no distinction in them in Canadian English, so they might all sound alike to you, but they're different. So this is low back, unrounded. Ah, and that's me. Here's a little bit, the same one, but a little bit rounded. Ah. So it's a cute little puppy. And then push your tongue a little bit higher for this one. And I'm saying these instructions, and I actually mean for you to try this out on your own, because usually the easiest way to hear the distinctions is to know what they feel like when you produce them. So I'll walk through all these again, and you can try to produce them along with me. But here's the two front vowels, which are very close, like in half a pack a day or half a pack a day. Okay, so let's do them all. Let's try schwa, just kind of a default neutral position for your tongue. Not too low, not too high, not too front, not too back. And then a little bit lower and backer. And then let's try this one. I think it's easy to make the switch from wedge to ah. Round your lips a little bit. Raise your tongue a little bit higher. And also round your lips a little bit more for this one than for this one. We'll hear that distinction again. And then this is like in cat, maybe. Sorry. And then a little bit lower and backer for this one. Okay, that's tricky. You can listen to that as many times as you want. It takes practice to kind of get these distinctions down. Most of them are not common distinctions in the languages of the world for a reason, because they're hard to hear. But this leads me to the point of like, why do we get these shifts in Canadian English that we do? So this is the complete IPA chart with all the vowels, including the ones that are not normally considered a part of English, just so you can see what's happening with the vowel shifts in Canadian English. So we are going to talk about all these various vowel symbols eventually. We're not ready for it yet, but that's just to show you where this is leading. So the cool thing is with these various Canadian vowel shifts is that they all seem to be going in the same direction. They're all going counterclockwise. So I mentioned there is that American vowel shift happening in the Great Lakes region of the United States. Those vowel shifts are always all moving in a clockwise direction if you plot out the vowels using this sort of chart, using the sort of two primary dimensions of tongue position in the IPA. In American English, they're moving American English, they're moving clockwise, and Canadian English, they're moving counterclockwise. So the two systems are diverging. They're moving in opposite directions. But this also helps explain why we get this kind of seemingly random connection or a collection of vowel shifts. So let's say I have going to or let's maybe start out here. So going to aw.
Bob.
This vowel is kind of moving a little bit further back, maybe a little bit up, leaving a little bit of space here to move kind of in the same general direction.
Half.
Since moved out of the way, we can move down to it.
Bed. Head.
Like that. And then since moved out of the way, it can move down to where was.
Bid. Head.
So on and so forth. And then for whatever reason, this is more general in English nowadays, but ooh, a nice round back ooh, like my dad might have produced it,
Spoons.
is moving forward to this.
Spoons.
So when I was talking about this being ooh fronting, what I mean is you're moving your tongue a little bit further forward as you produce that vowel.
Spoons.
Ooh, as opposed to ooh. For this ooh, this symbol here, when you produce it, say for production exercises in this class, try to shove your tongue back as far as it can go, round your lips as tightly as they can, and make an ooh.
Spoons.
Spoons. This upsilon, the horseshoe vowel, is moving in this general direction. I don't know how that really connects with any of these others, except it's kind of moving in the appropriate, spin, going counterclockwise.
Hood. Hood.
Like that. I should make these a bit louder. I'll just walk through them all once more.
Bid. Head. Bed. Head.
Half.
Bob.
Bob.
Spoons.
Spoons. Hood. Hood.
Right. So there you go. Watch out for that. Your vowels may be closer to the ends of these arrows than to the beginning of these arrows. But I am going to describe the systems to you according to where, we're used to the vowels being. So this is when I use this symbol, it's an I, because that's what it represents in the IPA. When I use this symbol, it's U, because that's what represents the IPA. Okay, so I talked about this vowel shift in Canada, the odd, aw, like in Bob to Bob. But this rule normally in Canada only applies to native ah, like for words that sound like they're natively English words, like Bob or dog or something like that. Dog, however you pronounce it. The funny thing is that for words that look like they come from other languages, in what in America would be an ah, would become an ah or an ah in Canadian English. So if one form in which I encountered this, for any of you hockey fans out there, if there are any, there was there used to be a Minnesota hockey team called the North Stars, and they had a player called Mike Modano on their team, who I think is American originally. Modano is his last name. It's, I believe, of Italian extraction. Modano is how we always used to say it back in the good old days. But when I move up here, everybody says Modano. So likewise, you may have heard this sort of shift for a word like pasta maybe, or Mazda, the car company, might be Mazda in Canada. One example I heard at the Calgary airport, the a vowel does not really exist in Spanish. They have a vowel sort of maybe in between those two. But there's this word for thank you, and I saw a customs official talking to a Spanish-speaking family, and as he handed their whatever Mexican passport back to them at the airport, he said gracias, which is not really how it's said in Spanish, instead of gracias. And I like to ask this question in class normally, but there's this word which has more than one sort of manifestation in different varieties of Canadian English, but I say garage for that. There's also kind of a British pronunciation of garage, and I've also heard garage in Canadian English, where this becomes more like that typewriter A vowel, as opposed to the garage. Which leads me to William Shatner, not Shatner. So William Shatner is a famous Canadian actor. A lot of Americans don't even realize he's Canadian because he's kind of like an American TV icon in Star Trek and whatnot. He comes from Montreal, and I believe he's bilingual in English and French. But be that as it may, he had Canadian pronunciation of some interesting forms that you might expect to sound more French than the way he pronounces them. So this is a clip I found on the internet a while back of William Shatner reading through a script for Star Trek, trying to say the word that's spelled like this.
Spock, sabotage the system. Spock, restore the atmosphere. Spock, sabotage the system. I wish I knew what to do. Observations, Mr. Spock.
Okay, can that line 193 again with sabotage, pronounced sabotage?
I don't say sabotage. You say sabotage. I say sabotage.
Gotta stick to your guns. especially if you're Captain Kirk.
Deal it. Is this why you sabotaged my ship?
Oh, it has not been sabotaged. We had to make some changes in it to adjust it to us.
You said we.
Yes, of course.
All right, some classic Star Trek stuff there. Anyways, it's just funny in that little clip because he says sabotage, and then when the actress responds, she immediately turns it around to say sabotage. So I've heard about similar stories from my colleague Darren Flynn, who has his daughter is named, well, her name is Tara, and the way his family pronounces that name is Tara. But wherever he goes in Canadian-speaking world, they say Tara, just kind of no matter what. So people make that kind of translation in their heads, right? So maybe we're sharing across dialects or varieties the same phoneme in some sense in those contexts, but you implement it according to whatever the phonetics are of your particular variety of English. So if you hear somebody else say sabotage, maybe you will, maybe you won't. You will translate that to sabotage in your mind when you actually produce it yourself, right? Or if you hear somebody say Tara, maybe you're going to translate that to Tara because that's just how you are used to producing it. So I will say that with that in mind, phonology is important. So sounds exhibit patterns in a language. So remember that specific allophones of a phoneme often emerge in specific phonetic contexts. That's basically what phonology means. So again, here's an example from English. We have this phoneme T, and it appears as the flap whenever it's in between a stressed syllable and an unstressed syllable. So if you have a word like metal, which is spelled with a T, and you can get the T itself as an actual stop in a form like metallic because the stress shifts to the second syllable there. This is going to be pronounced as a flap if the stress is on the first syllable of a word like metal and there's no stress on the syllable following it. But we can see it's a T here or an actual stop in metallic because it changes allophonic form once stress moves on to it. So these little details, these little patterns matter, and they can also help you transcribe English because you'll know more what to expect when you get a specific, string of phonemes in English or some variety thereof. So the production of specific allophones is often going to be specified by phonological rule. So I'm going to give you a kind of very brief walkthrough of what rules you can expect to have an effect on the actual phonetics of spoken English here in the second half of this lecture. I think I'm going to pause here for a second just so I don't run out of hard drive space on my machine and so I can refill my water glass, but I'll pick it back up right after this here in a second as we look through different varieties of English and what sort of phonological patterns they show. So see you in a second.